everyone, I am excited to welcome you all to our HITRUST webinar introducing the new HITRUST Essentials one-year assessment. I am Jessica Brown and I will be your moderator today. On our webinar today, we will cover an introduction to the new HITRUST E1 assessment and use cases, E1 focus areas, how the E1 is cyber threat adaptive, performing an E1 validated assessment, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'd like to now introduce our presenters today. Jeremy Huval, HITRUST's Chief Innovation Officer, and Robert Booker, HITRUST Strategy and Implementation Officer. I'm now going to hand it over to Robert to get us started.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and hello, everyone. It's so good to be with you today. We're real excited today to bring finally this E1 assessment to all of you. It's been a labor of love over the past months as we've worked through this series of use cases and talked to many people across the industry about the challenge of assessment and certification, across a portfolio of needs for all industries. And as we're bringing this forward, we wanted to spend time with you really to get you into the understanding of what we've built here, but also to really cover off the why and the how of what we've built and what we're hoping will be a great tool for each of you in continuing your journey to build a system of high security assurance, high security value, and great security execution. So with that, I look forward to getting into it with you. So we'll start here around the market need. And we've been asked a couple of times in the past months in discussions with different security leaders and stakeholders. We've been asked and we've been asking, this question around, how do we look at getting the level of effort and the level of approach to security assurance, right for each community that needs security assurance. And what we continue to see and find is that as especially with the advent of technical delivery and cloud service providers, the continued investment in use of third parties for the delivery of parts of the technology system, and the complexity of a system of different companies all working together, we keep seeing this need to think about the security of the system, which comes together to make up the overall technology stack for a number of companies. So as we looked at that, we came to realize that the needs for each organization vary, but the needs are oftentimes also made up of a portfolio of capabilities and technologies and suppliers that come together to ultimately deliver the solution that's being used to deliver value to the organization and to secure the organization. And so as we really got into this with security leaders across multiple industries, we heard several messages loud and clear. The first thing we heard is that the risks that organizations are experiencing, and directly put, the breaches that organizations are experiencing, are oftentimes not focused upon the companies that are the highest inherent risk, but unfortunately are resulting from the companies that are the lowest inherent risk. And what I mean by that is that when you look at where an attack will take place in a system, oftentimes it's the weakest point of that system, if you will, the weakest link. And so what security leaders have been telling us, and what we've continued to see as we've looked at breach data that's publicly available, as well as conversations with people that don't want to be public about their breaches, we recognize that oftentimes it's the companies at the edges, companies that are outside of the more traditional vendor risk path that are being impacted. And so that immediately calls to our mind, how do we address that problem? Do we address that problem in a way that we would expect every company to achieve a comprehensive security program focused on the highest inherent risk? Or would we instead look at a portfolio of capabilities that would focus on risk management and security assurance based upon the level of inherent risk of the organization? And that's what we believe we've done with the E1 capability. That's what we hear from the people that we have been talking to about this, and that's what we're so excited about today. So as we look at this, we're really looking at a level significantly above what many organizations are focused on doing or having to do because of level of effort and just sending out questionnaires. We want to be better than a questionnaire. We want to be better than asking somebody, do you have a security program that's mature? And we want to be better than a situation where people give us their self-assessed point of view based on the things they do. We want to look at those essentials. We want to look at the basic capabilities. We want to make sure they're operating effectively. So that's the first thing. We just need to look at the level of risk where the organization is, and we need to be much more comprehensive in the ability to validate that maturity than we would be with a questionnaire. So that's thing one. The second thing is also a recognition that different organizations start their security journey in different places. And oftentimes, as you look at a company that may eventually want to seek the highest level of security assurance, they're oftentimes starting from the basics. They may be a new company that's just getting into business, or a company that's just investing further into security for part of their technology, and they need to be able to step into their security journey. And so it's really helpful for those organizations to know that if I start today, I can take everything I'm working on tomorrow. That becomes the foundation for something more that I want to build. And so we really do think of this journey and this focus on a series of steps of security as highly valuable. So it's just really exciting to think about the fact that there's a capability here that can allow organizations to look at their security or the security of their partners and their trading partners, their suppliers, based upon where they really are today in their journey. And we think that's very exciting. So, Jeremy, your thoughts on this? I know you've been a part of a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Robert, and hi, everyone. Yeah, for me, this is another tool in everyone's toolbox to help balance, like the graphic shows, level of effort and level of assurance. And what we mean by that, to build on some of Robert's commentary, not every relationship or every business scenario warrants the highest levels or even the moderate levels of assurance delivered through HITRUST's other assessment offerings and certification offerings. And we're aware that questionnaires are everywhere, but there's a definite need to do more than questionnaires in many, many circumstances in business relationships, but still not come in at such a level of effort that it'll take months and months to complete. And that's the focus. That's sort of the beauty of this new HITRUST assessment, the E1, lower level of effort, but still have a validated result that you could trust, focusing on really narrow collection of HITRUST CSF requirements. And so I think this is a very valuable add, and I can speak for all of HITRUST to say we're excited to bring this to market. And I guess, Jessica, if you can go to the next slide, I'll tell everyone a little bit about this new offering. So you'll see this table. This is HITRUST's assurance portfolio. At the top, we have our risk-based R2, risk-based 2-year R2 assessment. And for those that don't know, that's sort of what we renamed the traditional HITRUST assessment that's been around for so long. It has a readiness and validated option. At the beginning of 2022, we rolled out the I1, the implemented 1-year certification and assessment. And this is our answer to moderate assurance scenarios and needs. And it also has a readiness and validated. And enter the E1, the essentials 1 year is what we're talking about today. It also has a readiness and validated assessment option. And these characteristics we will go into in this webinar. But at a high level, what you can take away just to the 10,000-foot view, the E1 is meant to provide an appropriate, suitable assessment for organizations of lower risk profiles. It is a product of the HITRUST Assurance Program, so it'll have the quality and reliability that HITRUST deliverables and reports are known for. And for the organizations that seek it out and complete E1s and get that certification for the E1, it lets them demonstrate that they've achieved the minimum bar of foundational cybersecurity practices, and they've got cybersecurity hygiene well in place. It does have a threat adaptive foundation. We'll talk about how it's threat adaptive a bit more later in the presentation. And as was mentioned, it focuses on just those cybersecurity controls without expanding into compliance with any given source. It's not, compliance is not the focus. Also, it doesn't touch on leading cybersecurity practices, not the focus. This is foundational stuff. And it is excellent at letting organizations get ready for other more robust HITRUST assessments. So again, very high level, and we'll talk about all this in future slides. So I'll hand it back to Robert and Jessica, if you don't mind advancing the slides.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And you know, I think I want to encourage us all to think about this concept of a portfolio. Think about the concept of a journey, and think about how organizations look at where they are in their security journey as they step through a portfolio of capabilities. You know, I'll talk about the portfolio first because I think that's really vital. As Jeremy's just said, you know, you can start here at the introductory level of assurance, looking at those cybersecurity essentials, good basic hygiene foundational capabilities, and knowing that you've covered that list of capabilities well. But then, depending upon your need, depending upon your security risk, you know, you may find that you really do require a wider and more complete view of your security practices. You're looking at the maturity of your overall security system and whether it aligns with leading security practices or not. And that's the purpose of having that next step in the journey, what we would describe as a medium level of inherent risk being addressed by a medium level of effort. And that would be the I1 capability. And then, of course, as Jeremy just said, you know, HITRUST has stood for years for the robust, comprehensive security capability with expanded views of risk management, an expanded approach to compliance reporting with what we now call the R2 or our expanded practices capability within the portfolio, all of which are focused on the needs of the organization that is going through the journey. So what's really important here, and we've focused a lot in the design of the E1, it's super important for us to recognize that if an organization is starting on the lower left of this graphic with the E1, it doesn't mean they have less need. It means they're focusing their need on a specific part of the portfolio universe right now. They're focusing on cybersecurity essentials, on foundational security, and on being confident that they've delivered a maturity and a execution capability for those really essential security controls. And Jeremy's going to talk in a minute about what those are. We also feel like, regardless of where you are in this portfolio, the journey needs to have the highest level of quality and integrity. So you know, think of this as high quality at 3 levels, not moderate, high, or low quality. And what we mean by that is that regardless of whether you get an E1 report from an assessor with HITRUST or an R2 report from an assessor with HITRUST, you are getting a report that has transparency on what the requirements are. You can share with the market and with the people that you work with, you know, what the scope of your capability is. You know that if you went to a different assessor and asked for the report, you have a very high level of certainty that you're going to get consistency in the outcome and the product that's created. You can compare the results between different assessments with a level of transparency and ease. And you know that you've got high quality and high integrity in the delivery of the capability. So it's really about having high quality and reliable assessment at 3 different levels of security assurance, not varying levels of assessment quality. We think that's a really important design point. So you can know that if I'm starting with the E1, or I'm asking a third party to do an E1, or I have a new company that's joining our enterprise that we've just merged with, and we're asking for a baseline assessment of their most foundational security controls, and we're going to do an E1, you can rely upon the quality and the delivery integrity of that report. That's really going to be critical to the success of your future. So Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you for the next slide here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So there's 2 primary use cases for the E1. It as a destination, meaning this is the assurance mechanism, an E1 certification that the organization is going to strive for, and it's what we need right now, and maybe forever. There's also a stepping stone use case that helps the organization advance and get ready for the next assessment. Maybe they eventually want to get an I1 or an R2. So this slide focuses on the destination use cases, and then a little bit later I'll talk about the stepping stone use case. So Um, there is, without a doubt, many use cases for the E1 in its own right. It is not built to only be a stepping stone toward a more robust thing. Um, so this, for organizations that achieve it, let them demonstrate that they've got the essential cybersecurity hygiene slash foundational cybersecurity controls in place, designed effectively, operating effectively, in place. And for organizations of a certain risk profile, that is enough. What we mean by certain risk profile is, um, in a TPRM or third-party risk management perspective, there is typically a tiering of vendor risk, from maybe very low or no risk all the way up to ultra critical slash highest risk. Um, Now, we're on the lower end of the spectrum, and we're not so low in inherent risk of the vendor relationship that a security questionnaire is it. That's all you need. And certainly there are those types of relationships. And we're also not so high in inherent risk that there's a need to get more robust assurances through months and months of assessment work and a long tail before you actually get a report. So there's this sort of sweet spot for these vendor risk relationships or vendor relationships in terms of risk, where I'm not so low that I can, all I need is a questionnaire, but I'm not high enough where even an I-1 is warranted. Um, and again, this has a validated and readiness assessment component. And so in there could be a need for, hey, I need a readiness assessment report from your organization over E1 now, and maybe eventually I'll need a validated assessment and certification on the E1. So there certainly is a destination for those organizations of a certain risk from a TPRM perspective. Just outside of the third-party risk management context, there's certainly a use case for organizations that want to differentiate themselves in the marketplace to show that they've got these foundational cybersecurity controls in place and they've been through an assessor's review of it and they've made it out with a certification. And that certainly can be a differentiator in the marketplace to help win business and satisfy requests for some kind of assurance mechanism and quell any, hopefully quell the deluge of requests for cybersecurity questionnaires. Also, this could be very handy whenever activity takes place, like standing up a new technology platform and needing assurance over it, rolling out a new business unit, needing assurances there for the cybersecurity, or we have just onboarded a new vendor or are about to onboard a new vendor and want to understand their cybersecurity risk profile. And then also, I think about M&A activity, doing due diligence reviews of the cybersecurity function of the organization. And again, this could be initiated by the assessed entity or by the one being acquired or by the acquirer, so buy side or sell side. And this could help get cybersecurity insurance premiums more favorable. Um, Robert, is there any other destination use cases you'd talk about here, maybe around benchmarking?
Yeah, I think Jeremy, I think the challenge I always saw with my career and my years of working as a CISO, for me the question always was, did I know where my partners were, and did my partners know where I needed them to be? And so I think about this as the beginning of a relationship where we have the ability to talk about security capabilities using a common language, and we can measure maturity using a common measurement system. I find that oftentimes words mean different things to different people. So, just thinking about a relationship where we're all focused on the same problem. We all care very much about cybersecurity, and we want it to be right. But oftentimes, I may be talking about expectations in one way of looking at a problem, and the entity or the colleague I'm talking to, on the phone or on a webinar, in a Zoom call or whatever, they're nodding with me, but they're thinking something different than I'm thinking as we talk about the same thing. So I really do think about that ability to for almost every one of these use case examples you've laid out, the ability for us to communicate with clarity and for us to know in a very consistent way that we understand each other, we're working on the same problem, and that the work we do has a level of maturity and a level of execution that we all agree would be appropriate. So just that ability to communicate consistently and to measure consistently is so powerful. And it really isn't just for E1, it's really for any portfolio of security execution. And so I think that's a really important.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, and part of the value that E1 brings is it helps the assurance obtainment, as it were, move at the speed of business. So if I need to know maybe how bad is bad quick, so I could actually start on the road to remediation and have conversations about how are we going to work together to fix X and Y and Z gap in your security program, you can use this E1 assessment, even the E1 readiness, as a quicker way to find those gaps, speaking the same language. And so this can help move at the speed of business where larger, more robust assessments can't. So Jessica, next slide. This is the stepping stone use case, and this is a very important one. Although secondary, the E1 was designed primarily as a destination use case. The stepping stone we spent a lot of time on this use case. And as of HITRUST V11, the E1 all fits within the I1, which all fits within the R2. And what that means is if you are new to HITRUST, or if you need demonstrable milestone toward achievement of an eventual I1 or R2, or if you just need more time to work toward achievement of one of those larger, more robust assessments, the E1 can be your starting place without having to worry about control jettison. And that's a term I made up. And what I mean by that is the expectation won't be, hey, work on these controls, get them in place, and then whenever you get to the I1, no one's going to ask about them, right? And so you get to focus on establishing a foundation that builds as you expand up the assurance portfolio without that jettison of controls. Very important use case. There's a lot of work that went into this to make it happen in V11. And these circles in this graphic are not meant to be scale. It's just demonstrative of the nesting that we've got. If you want to hear more about HITRUST new major version of the CSF V11, there was a webinar that aired just a few days ago. If you want to see it, it can be available. It is available on our website for replay. So do check it out. If you haven't, we are thrilled to get V11 out and in everyone's hands. It's got a bunch of stuff that we're really excited about. So do check it out if you haven't checked it out already. And Jessica, if you can advance to the next slide. The HITRUST E1 certification journey, for those that want to get the E1 certification and not just readiness, is just the same as the R2 and I1 certification journey. So if you're familiar with what it takes from scratch to get to certification for either of those other types of assessments, nothing new here. I'm not going to go step by step. If you want to hear in detail about the certification journey, we've got a bunch of resources available on our website, and our customer success managers are happy to talk more about it. But the point of this slide is exactly the same as the I1 and R2. The only difference is the subject matter that you'd be focusing on is much, much smaller on the E1 compared to those other assessments. So I'll hand it back to Robert. Jessica, if you advance the next slide. Let's talk about the focus areas of the E1.
Yeah, Jeremy, I've come to really love your term control jettison, because I think all of our colleagues on the phone here that live every day to try to meet the security expectations of their organization, oftentimes with very stringent budget requirements. Nobody wants to do it twice, and nobody wants to do it halfway. So I think that term really lives well in my mind, and I hope many people on the phone are nodding and listening and saying, yeah, boy, I don't want that either. And I think it's a really important focus on why the CSF V11 is so valuable, and why the approach we've taken here is helpful, because really I do want to get better over time. I want to grow my program And I also want to be able to deliver assurance today on what I'm doing today. And that really does talk about the E1 focus areas. And as we go to the next slide, I think, we're going to talk a little bit about this concept of hygiene. And, as we worked on this over the past months and talked to many, many people about the expectations, I will tell you that there was a lot of consistency around the fact that people all had different points of view. So I talked to many people I respect and that are great leaders in security across industries. And one individual would say, I need a very aggressive sort of technical examination of the system, and another person was like, I need almost a compliance review. So it demonstrated to all of us that there's a lot of variety in what people think is enough. And so when we put this together, we recognized that an important part of the journey here was to create a common understanding and to help all of us establish a consistent expectation around what this was about. And as I said earlier, a lot of this has to do with language and understanding the requirements, knowing that we're covering the things that are most essential. We know how to deliver on those expectations. We know how they can be measured, and we know how to operate the system in a manner that we're going to get a predictable outcome every time we look at a threat or we look at an event. We know what we know about that capability. I think that's really important, and that was an important consideration as we built the assessment and as we built that first step in the journey. We also wanted it to be something that people could use to communicate with their colleagues that were leaders in business or potentially people in corporate governance, possibly even to have discussions with their customers. And so we didn't want it to be so deeply technical that you had to be a network engineer or an application engineer to even understand what we were talking about. So we really looked at making sure that when we brought the requirements forward, we provided them in understandable plain English terms that would be helpful. And so all of that together I think is really critical to our ability to communicate with clarity. So as we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the focus of this. And we played with this, we modeled it, we had a lot of iterations of what should be in and what should be out, and we kept coming back to ground truth on this. And ground truth was we needed foundational security, we needed to address the most active threats, and we needed a capability that could be done at the speed of business, but that would yield an outcome that said an organization that achieved this level of assurance could have a high level of confidence that they've hit those most foundational things, and they can demonstrate to others and to themselves that they've done those with quality. And so we really have focused on this term of having cybersecurity hygiene, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So one of the things we looked at as well is there something out there already? Is there a capability that we say, well, let's just go build an assurance program on top of something that exists? And after modeling this, and Jeremy spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, approaching probably 1,000 hours looking at this, and as we looked at it, we recognized there just isn't any one capability. So what we really put together was we put together something that came out of the HITRUST CSF, a framework with almost 15 years of experience with it, well over a decade of practical real world experience. And then we sort of looked at other things and we said, this is right because we've got the right level of coverage. And we also see overlaps and what I described as opportunities to sort of validate the credibility of the problem we're solving in alignment with other needs and other expectations. So, whether you be in healthcare where something like HICP is the framework, if you look at NIST, if you look at Cyber Essentials from CISA, all of those really get to the spirit of what is enough, but they all have different perspectives on what is enough. And so you really kind of need to look across all of this and apply this expectation of assurance and hygiene to the model. And I think that's what we've done really well. So it's also important to notice what we don't do. And I want to be really clear about this because I'm sure we'll have questions in time with people. Is we're not we're not giving you a compliance report. This is not focused on compliance, and compliance is very important, and we recognize and respect compliance. We have capabilities in the R2 to deliver high quality compliance reporting for a number of capabilities. And we know many organizations require that, and we see the E1 as a step to that outcome if an organization does need that. But this is really focused on that essential security execution. And so I think if you look at it as, do we do enough? Are we doing enough? Can we show that we're doing that much? I think that's what you'll find here. And we do have the I1 and the R2 to provide more comprehensive assurance for those that need it. So next slide, please. So this concept of hygiene, we actually recognize that hygiene means different things to different people. So we really wanted to focus on those basics, those minimum things, and we had a little bit of fun with this. And certainly we all learned in great detail in 2020 how to wash our hands. There was a lot of discussion about what is good hand washing, and if you ask children across different countries how to wash their hands now, they probably have a really good idea because they've been taught as we've all dealt with the pandemic over the last years. And so you do think about this as, I'm going to wash my hands, I'm going to make sure I'm clean and I'm tidy. But it's not the same as my doctor and a surgeon scrubbing in for a surgical procedure, where they have very stringent protocols and very stringent expectations of what does it mean to clean themselves. They clean under their fingernails, they clean their nail beds, all of that. And that is very important if you're going to be dealing with the level of hygiene needed to avoid giving somebody an infection in their body. But it's also quite important to wash your hands. So we think our approach to hygiene is hand washing, not surgical levels of hygiene. And also when you go to the dentist and get your teeth cleaned, you get really that feeling of really good clean teeth that you get after you have your teeth cleaned by a hygienist. You feel, I still can remember, you feel really good when you finish that. You may not feel good while it's going on if you're like me and you don't like going to the dentist, but at the end you're like, wow, my teeth and my mouth feel really clean. But every day I brush my teeth and I they feel clean then too, but just not the same level of hygiene. So as you're explaining it, understand we're not talking about 15 levels of hygiene. We're talking about the essentials, and I think it's important just to make sure we're focused on that. But Jeremy, the question for me really is, what does this mean? Like, how do we communicate it? And so I'd like to offer you the mic to really get into detail about what do we mean by the concepts here, and how did we actually select the controls that go into the E1?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. And Jessica, next slide, please. And so the E1's got 44 HITRUST CSF requirements, which is so significantly smaller than other HITRUST assessments. Hopefully those in the audience who are familiar with doing an example R2 is saying, wow, 44. Which 44? We can do this. I want to show the 44 that are in, but I don't want to show the actual depth of the HITRUST CSF requirement language just because the slides would be too busy. So instead, I want to show the concepts. I just want to speak to you guys as concepts as opposed to the full HITRUST CSF requirements in the following slides. And what I mean by that is, for example, on this bottom row, you might see a bullet that says require strong passwords, or the organization has strong passwords or something like that. That is not what you would see when you do this E1. Instead, you would see this HITRUST CSF requirement 10.01D, which is a full sentence written like a control. Password policy is applicable to the information systems are documented and enforced through technical controls. So one's a requirement and one's a concept. In the next few slides, I just want to talk concepts for the purposes of helping communicate what's in and what's out, so you guys have the benefit of understanding. Jessica, in the next slide, you'll see the first few domains here. And here's the concepts covered. I won't read through all of them. I'll pause for a moment so you guys can peruse and glance. And again, these aren't what you'd see when you do the E1 in terms of the language, but the concepts are what you'll see. So for example, you'll see one requirement in wireless domain 5. It says, I encrypt wireless transmissions like with WPA2. In Domain 9, you'll see a few requirements dealing with email security. Because email security is absolutely so critical nowadays to address a lot of threats that lean on email as a vector. On the next slide, you'll see the next few domains, actually just domain 11. Domain 11 in the framework is the largest domain. It deals with logical access control. Unsurprisingly, it's the largest domain in terms of requirements in the E1. And again, I'll pause, let everyone take a look at what's in here. On your access management, you've got just the usual suspects, new hires, terms, transfers, access reviews, least privilege. You got MFA, multiple factor authentication, several different ways. You've got controls for lockout and timeout, stuff like that. And we beat up privilege access. On the next slide, you'll see the remainder of the domains. We do cover all 19 domains in every HITRUST assessment offering. Again, these are meant to be foundational cybersecurity kind of controls. So the HITRUST CSF framework offers much more depth in every one of these areas than we go into here. This is a great starting point for those who want to build out their maturity or capabilities in any one of these areas, but we're not trying to do that in the E1 itself. So yeah, again, 44 requirements, physical, logical, the usual suspects are here. And hopefully, as you read through that list just now, none of this struck you as, wow, that's so above and beyond what I would consider cybersecurity hygiene. Hopefully you're looking at this and say, okay, I understand. And maybe the organization does a lot of this, but not all of it. But if there is a gap, it's very understandable and doable. And I can sell this internally if I need to sell it internally, just because it's so fundamental. And that's what we were aiming for here. So I'll hand it back to Robert in a little bit. Jessica, next slide. The cyber threat adaptive nature of the E1 is one of the things to me that makes it so cool. So I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this. Robert, what do we mean when we say cyber threat adaptive?
Yeah, well, I think in the simplest way of describing it, we mean that the system is going to continue to evolve as threats evolve. And for those of you on the phone, and many of you I know personally, and I also know your systems, you're operational leaders. You're living in the day-to-day fight against people that are trying to compromise your systems. You're seeing continuous attempts to phish your environment. You see attempts to brute force your perimeter, and you see all of this attack and noise. And so, what we've recognized in the past few years is that new techniques and new attack methods are being tried continually. And over time, we also recognize that the focus on controls that we had months ago has evolved to a new focus on controls based upon the current events in this current threat landscape. So it's really about understanding that the methods of compromise and attacks are changing. Attackers get better all the time. They don't have any rules, so they're unfortunately able to stress all of us in ways that are evolving and in some cases revolutionary. And the controls that we deal with have to evolve. And one of the concerns I've always had personally about compliance is the outcome, and I respect compliance so much, and I know it's such an important part of us governing our systems is to know they're compliant. Is compliance just oftentimes can't keep up. A framework, even a very good framework of compliance capabilities, you're always looking at the how quickly can you change that? How quickly can that evolve? And so, as we built CSF version 11, we spent a lot of time thinking about the reality of that and the fact that security assurance needs to evolve on a more agile way than maybe what's possible with other frameworks. And so the whole approach to this is to focus on threat adaptive as the outcome. And so, as new indicators of attack and indicators of compromise are known, what controls need to change, what controls need to become now required, what controls may need to become less emphasized. And so that's really an important part to us communicating to all of our stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And Jessica, if you can, let's jump to slide the area of the deck that talks about performing I1 validated assessments. The threat adaptive nature of this is very, very interesting. And just to quickly summarize the slides that we're skipping over, we leverage threat data from from the real world, and we map it to MITRE ATT&CK framework, and we use that on a continual basis to adjust the requirements that are key to the E1 as well as the I1. But for those of you who've gone through a number of HITRUST assessments that are wondering, okay, like, how is this different than other validated assessments? That's the focus of this. And for the sake of time, I wanted to jump to this because I know it might be some burning question areas for those of you who are in that mindset, especially if there's any assessors on the phone that kind of live and breathe this stuff. So Jessica, on the next slide, point of this slide is E1 validated assessment requirements are pretty much the same as I1 validated assessment requirements. So if you've done an I1, you shouldn't expect anything new or different on the E1 except the subject matter that you're actually looking at or assessing or implementing. So, these assessments, they use MyCSF. You have to use an external assessor firm to do the validation. It uses the HITRUST scoring rubric, but just like the I1, it focuses just on that corner of the implemented control maturity level. But when you hear me say it focuses just on implemented, know that it's not completely devoid of written policies and procedures. There are some requirements in the E1 and in the I1 as well that focus on the existence of written policies and or procedures. The E1s allow for carve-outs of third-party perform controls, optionally, just like the I1, and the CAP/GAP scoring thresholds and the certification scoring thresholds. The math there is just like the I1, and all validated E1 assessments are QA'd by HITRUST. What that means is after the external assessor finishes their work, the body of assessment documentation is submitted to HITRUST, and we perform quality review processes to ensure the documentation meets our expectations, and the level of testing and validation was in alignment with our assurance program requirements. And after QA is completed, HITRUST issues the final deliverables. On the next slide, we'll talk a bit more about QA. Again, just like I1, so if you've gone through I1 validated assessment QA, don't expect anything different. It has to be scheduled through our QA reservation system. A note on this QA reservation system, if you're interested, do work to secure your spot on the reservation calendar sooner than later. Those spots do fill up. Not to say we won't be able to process your assessment whenever you're ready, but it makes it easier scheduling wise to get in the calendar earlier. And HITRUST this is something unique to the E1, although there is an SLA on the I1. Uniquely on the E1, we're offering a 30 business days with HITRUST SLA post-submission. And on the I1, we also offer an SLA, it's 45 days instead. But what this means is after the body of assessment documentation is submitted to HITRUST, the ball will not be in HITRUST hands more than 30 business days. Like, we won't be the one to delay the assessed entity getting the report in their hands for more than 30 business days. And if we are, then you can contact your customer success manager after you get your final report, and we'll issue a complimentary report credit. And again, this is business days with HITRUST, no more than 30 business days. This is an SLA, and really this is to reflect that we will not be, we HITRUST and HITRUST QA will not be a bottleneck in helping this thing move quickly. So also on the next slide, I wanted to underscore the inheritance aspects of this. The E1 fully supports inheritance, and it supports cross-assessment type inheritance. So you can inherit from an R2 to an E1, from an I1 to an R2, from an E1 to an I1, all back and forth. And 85% of the requirements in the E1 are at least partially inheritable. So for organizations that are born in the cloud or have a cloud-focused scope for your E1, there's going to be a great deal that you can inherit from your cloud service provider. For example, if they are also part of the HITRUST assurance program and have an E1, I1, or R2 that's V11 and later. So we're very, very excited. There's a lot of work to get behind this, but I'm proud to show these numbers, and it reflects HITRUST's commitment to share responsibility and inheritance being the answer to a lot of challenges that exist whenever you've got providers performing controls for you. And so I guess I'll hand it back to Robert for some closing thoughts on the next slide.
Yeah, thank you. We're gonna go to Q&A. I want to make sure we have a few minutes to hear from you all and answer any specific questions that may have come up. But I want to thank each of you for your support of HITRUST and your commitment to security. We're grateful for the partnership that we have with all of you, whether you be a customer, an assessor, or a relying party. All of the above, we value that a lot. As mentioned, check out the other webinar. I think you'll find a lot of good information that will be complementary to what we've talked about today. We also have a blog post on the power of your portfolio, which really gets into some of the additional considerations around why HITRUST is taking this portfolio approach to security assurance. And of course, as always, reach out to your customer success manager. For those of you that are customers, if you're new to HITRUST and you just want to know more, our product specialists are available to speak with you, and we look forward to talking to you about your future success in your security journey. And so, Jessica, with that, I look forward to questions, and I'll turn it back to you to open up the phone.
Thanks, Robert. As a reminder, you may submit written questions using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop-down as all panelists. Jeremy, I think we've gotten quite a few questions here. I'll hand it over to you to start kind of looking through those and answering them as you guys, as we have time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jessica. There's a recurring question that I want to answer outright. It's a good question. The question is, can we see the 44 requirements that are included in the assessment somehow, like without buying it? And the answer is, yeah, there's a couple ways. If you already are a MyCSF subscriber, and you've got the ability to create an assessment, and you're not, for example, an I1 Lite or R2 report only customer that's locked into a very specific assessment type in your MyCSF access level, then go ahead and create an I1, for example, readiness assessment object in MyCSF. So if you're a professional, corporate, or premier subscriber, then and you got a free assessment like seat license available, create that assessment, play with it, check it out. And if you're not, if you want to just see the 44 requirements, reach out to someone in the HITRUST sales team, for example, a customer success manager, and we've got a deliverable that we could share with you that contains those 44 requirements. So you could see those in sort of PDF form outside the tool for your organization's evaluation purposes. So it's very possible to see these 44 requirements before you're truly a MyCSF subscriber. And if you are, it's even easier. Just go in and create the object. There's a few questions around pricing. Robert and I are not the best people to talk about pricing. Again, if you're interested, our sales team would love to have a chat with you about kind of what it takes pricing-wise to get access to MyCSF and to get access to these E1 assessment objects, as well as what it costs to get the assessment through HITRUST QA and turned into a certification report or validated assessment report. So I really like those questions because they're reflective of interest and what we're talking about. So thanks for those. Robert, I have a question that I'd like to hear your answer on. Will the E1 assessment lend itself to a startup telehealth company?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Jeremy. I did take a shot at it in the chat, so I got a little bit in there, but I'll expand on it because I think it's important. So, E1 is perfect for an organization that's a startup, and the reason it's perfect is it hits the most essential security controls that I think most of the customers of a telehealth company would be interested in knowing that you do well. And as you go back to the very beginning of our day together here, we're talking about where, oftentimes these challenges happen is with the smaller companies that are at the edges of a large system. And so telehealth is clearly a part of that. So I think any telehealth company that's in this business and starting could do a lot to develop confidence and trust with the people that they're trying to sell to or their early customers by having validated or a certification assessment of these essential capabilities. But I think what you've also talked about today, Jeremy, which is equally important, is depending upon the scope of the telehealth solution, that scope may lend itself to a requirement for compliance with, regulatory considerations like HIPAA, security rule, and other things in the future. Those are quite large hills to climb up for a new organization that's just starting. And so to be able to take the E1 capability, demonstrate early confidence to the market of people that you're selling to, and then turn around and build on that without any loss of investment in those security controls, that jettison concept that Jeremy introduced us to today. Avoiding that jettison concept, you could easily start with E1, then move right into a larger regulatory or compliance requirement, which you may need to achieve long term for a robust telehealth business. You'll have to likely meet those requirements. So the important thing is to demonstrate success early, in my mind, demonstrate that you're committed to security and that you're prepared to walk the journey. And I think the E1 and the portfolio do that for you.
Thanks, Robert. And there was a similar question dealing with, does HITRUST define which organizations should consider an E1, an I1, or an R2? And there's a lot of factors that go into the assessment that the organizations might choose and the type of certification they might choose if they're going down the certification route. And it's certainly more than we can unpack here. I do want to plug our recent publication of this HITRUST TPRM implementation handbook. And if you Google HITRUST TPRM implementation handbook, you'll see it. It's a PDF of some length that goes into detail about the inherent risk considerations that would drive that kind of decision. So do give that a read. It is a sort of meant to be a quick start guide that summarizes a lot more length that's reflective in our TPRM methodology document, also available on the internet. So for those seeking different levels of depth to this answer of question from a TPRM perspective, those are valuable resources that I encourage you to check out. And then also, I'd encourage anyone that uses a HITRUST assessment, report, certification, or really truly any kind of assessment mechanism, assurance mechanism, to work with their parties who you're giving it to understand, hey, what are your expectations? And we feel that this assessment mechanism meets the need. Let's work together to make sure we all understand and we're all aware of kind of the different strengths of assurances available. There's no substitute for working with the parties that you expect to give this to and making sure that you're collaborating and understanding correctly. There's a couple of questions dealing with inheritance that we didn't get to on the prior slide. Great questions. One of the questions was, will HITRUST update our shared responsibility matrix to include the E1 and to show which requirements specifically are inheritable and not inheritable in the E1? There's another question about, well, hey, why are some of those requirements not inheritable in the E1? We've got our latest version of the share responsibility matrix is 1.3. 1.4 is the next version of the SRM. It will contain a flag for every requirement that is or isn't in the E1. It'll also have the flag for what's in or out of the I1. So you'll see, okay, I can open it up, filter for the 44, and then filter for is it inheritable or not. Further, it will let you answer the question, why isn't this inheritable, or why is this only partially inheritable? It's got different SRM types that go into description of inheritability of the requirements. So be on the lookout for that. Our share responsibility inheritance team is actively working on it. So do be on the lookout for that. It's forthcoming. There's a few assurance questions I think should be pretty quick to answer. What are the sampling requirements dealing with the validated E1 assessment? Great news. We are striving for consistency. Consistency underscores simplicity when there's a lot of moving parts, right? So the answer is your validated sampling requirements match those of I1 and R2 assessments. So don't expect any nuanced or different sampling requirements you'd have to learn. For those who want to see them, they can be found on the back of our scoring rubric dealing with sampling based testing. So be on the lookout, or it's not forthcoming, it is already out. So Google HITRUST scoring rubric and you'll see it on the back there. Another question was, is there illustrative procedures for these 44 HITRUST CSF requirements? The answer is yes, there is, but because the because the E1 only uses the implemented control maturity level, there will only be that implemented control maturity level illustrative procedure. Another really good question was, hey, if this thing is threat adaptive and HITRUST is using real world threat data on a recurring basis to evaluate the 44 requirements that are in the E1, does that mean the 44 requirements will change periodically? And what if it changes once I'm already validated? So Robert, do you want to tackle that question briefly?
Yeah, for sure. The answer is yes, it will. It will change should the data demonstrate that there's a requirement for a change. So should a new threat emerge with new controls that offer the best mitigation against that threat, and should it meet the criteria that we're mapping through the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we will provide that as an advisory update to both the CSF and if it impacts the scope of the essentials or frankly the I1 and R2 assessments as well. We'll provide that update. So I would actually encourage organizations to follow those advisories without regard to whether or not you are going to seek an additional validated assessment or a certification, or even just do a readiness assessment in the next cycle. So that would be annual for the E1. Without regard to that, I really encourage people to look at that data and those advisories as they're issued, including the assessed entities. It can be really valuable insights for organizations to say, hey, we see a new risk, for example, in supply chain risk around software integrity for a piece of software that's widely used across industry. It'd be a really good and relevant example for all of us in the last 2 years. So, knowing about that when as soon as that becomes relevant will allow you and your organization to prepare yourself today to protect yourself today, which I think is ultimately the goal all of us have. And then when you do come forward for doing your readiness work for your next cycle, you'll pick up that requirement, and it will be required for the next cycle of validation or certification.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Robert. Got time for maybe one or two more questions. There's a follow-up question from Jill on where can I get that shared responsibility matrix that was mentioned earlier. Good question. 2 places. One is within MyCSF on the references page available from the top link. You'll see some downloadable SRMs. One's the sort of baseline template that has the full HITRUST CSF with the inheritability information for all 2,000 plus requirements. And then we've got share responsibilities specific to several of our inheritance providers, including the major cloud providers. There's also a copy of the share responsibility matrix downloadable from the HITRUST just general website. It has a little bit less detail than you'll find in the MyCSF version, but you can get it there as well. And I think we're coming up on time. So I personally want to thank everyone for staying with us to the end. And thanks for your interest in this new HITRUST assessment. Again, we're super excited about it. Robert, any closing comments?
I just want to echo my gratitude as well, Jeremy. This is every person on the call today are important stakeholders in this challenge that we all share around information security and information protection. And we're really looking forward to your feedback and continued innovation in these areas, and really encourage many of you to take this out and look at it and find the fit in your organization. There are places that it clearly can help, and we're here to continue to evolve the portfolio to support each of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, and this brings us to the conclusion of our webinar.